This brief presentation will serve as the orientation for the Biodiversity and Monitoring Assessment Program's Health and Safety Environment Plan, or HSEP. The purpose of this orientation is to ensure that all researchers engaged in the project are aware of what are safe practices and procedures associated with the work, and further, because it is required training as part of the contribution agreement that we have signed with the Pacific Trail Pipelines Limited Partnership. What I'll do is go over some of the key elements of the health and safety plan, identify the requirements that must be met before going into the field, and describe the process of meeting this and other training requirements. Each person involved in the project will receive a hard copy of the Biodiversity Monitoring Assessment Program's HSEP. This presentation does not serve as a substitute for fully reading that document. Further, each field crew is required to carry a copy of the HSEP with them into the field for the information that it contains. The HSEP will be periodically updated, and updated copies will be provided to all participants. In version 2, the 2014 edition of the HSEP, section 1 contains all of the emergency contact information and is located at the beginning of the HSEP. By way of really quick overview, the project that we're working on is a partnership between Chevron and Apache under the name of Pacific Trail Pipelines Limited Partnership. The pipeline portion of the project goes from Summit Lake to Kitimat. The compressor plant will be located in Bish Creek, south of Kitimat in Douglas Arm. Current access to that location is currently by boat chartered by KMLNG out of Old Kitimat. And eventually, once the road is completed, upgrade work is underway now, then there'll be restricted access to the site via road network. The early works phase of the program is over, so KBR is no longer involved. Instead, JGC Fluor is the primary site contractor for work on the site, as well as finishing off the upgrading of the Bish FSR road. As mentioned before, the beginning of the HSEP begins with all of the emergency and non-emergency contact information. For UNBC, Jeannie Robert is the research manager and primary contact. Contact information for PTPLP, KLNG, and JGC Fluor are also there. The context around the contact depending on where you are working and what you are doing. Site-specific orientations are arranged through the UNBC BMAP Research Manager before visiting a site. Extensive orientation is required with JGC Fluor before first visiting the plant site, as well as orientations with PTPLP. It's very likely that those orientations need to be done each year. This video serves as a specific introduction to the safety and emergency procedures, but does not replace your need to be familiar with the entire HSEP. At site check-in on a daily basis, you'll be alerted to active areas, ongoing activities, what radio frequencies are being used, where flaggers are positioned. If active logging or construction is underway, then one can expect frequent flaggers along the road networks. So to look at our orientation and training, as we know, all new employees are expected to have undergone UNBC's orientation and safety checklist, gone through with their supervisors when first hired. The orientation to the health and safety plan is fulfilled by this presentation, but there'll also be specific training courses that may be needed. And it's important to note that it's up to us at UNBC, it's our responsibility to maintain up-to-date records of all training. And because of the need that all employees be covered by WCB, then we will not be using any volunteers in the field work, as we've already agreed to. There's a variety of activities and required certifications depending on the activities that you're undertaking. In Appendix 7 of the HSEP, there's a list of activities and safety procedures documented by protocol. If additional activities come up, that will necessitate a change in the HSP. Everyone involved in the project is required to have at least level 1 first aid certification. That is appropriate to the risk and remoteness of the activities, provided group size is never over 5, which we've all agreed to. Everyone is required to take the Bear Aware training, which I'll describe later, to undergo this HSEP orientation, as well as to be trained in the proper use of personal protective equipment. And that training will be done through the Risk and Safety Office at UNBC. Depending on the tasks that you're involved in, WMIS training, ATV certification or snow machine certification, electrofishing permits, pleasure operator cards for watercraft, and even a restricted operator certificate for maritime if using a marine radio may be required. Section 14 of the manual goes through a hazards assessment. The principle here is to eliminate and control all hazards. So the work activity, for example, working with chemical hazards, a hazard is identified, what the control methods are to try to reduce that hazard or control it completely, as well as the procedure. It's important to pay particular attention then when going through Section 13 to be familiar with the different controls and procedures that are in place for the hazards that you're likely to encounter. We've agreed to a set of general principles with PTPLP, and all UNBC employees working on the BMAP are expected to adhere to all those principles at all times, and they're in the manual. In fact, the contributor, be that KBR, KMLNG, or PTPLP, shall stop any activity immediately if, in the opinion of the contributor, the activity is not in accordance with the HSEP, cannot be conducted safely as a result of adverse weather conditions, or is perceived as unsafe and likely to cause an incident, i.e. resulting in imminent danger. Partway through last field season, we were required to add a safety watch to each crew. This has now been formalized in our HSEP. Each team shall ensure that when conducting research in the field, there is someone appointed to be primarily in charge of safety. That person will be responsible for inspecting the performance of any work and ensuring that all project health and safety management procedures are addressed and implemented. Ultimately, that safety watch is responsible for exercising a stop work authority if work conditions are unsafe. The contractors need to know where we are, what we're doing, when to expect us. Therefore, all field work is to be scheduled through the UNBC BMAP research manager, who will contact the appropriate KBR, PTPLP, or KMLNG individuals. Initially, we should allow at least a couple of weeks lead time, see the manual, although longer times may be required for Bish Creek if the activities initially require the use of a wildlife monitor to accompany the researcher. Both Chevron and JGC Fluor have added a new term to our lexicon this year, and that is SIMOPS, which stands for Simultaneous Operations. By scheduling all activities at least 1 week in advance, we will ensure that the proper liaison takes place with any clearing, logging, other activities, so that the environment that we're working in is a safe environment. Last year, we primarily focused on tracking crews when they were in the field. This year, all trips associated with the BMAP, whether using your own vehicle or a BMAP vehicle, will be coordinated through the BMAP manager. Trip plans are needed to be filed. The details are in section 10.3 of the HSEP. But they include the driver details, so this means you're not just flipping a coin as you're leaving the parking lot who's driving. Passenger details, planned stops, positive call-ins, those being times you're checking in, even if there isn't a problem. Details are in the HSEP. regardless of where we're working, we will have a daily check-in regime. If you're working off the PTP or KMLNG footprint, meaning you're not actively working in one of their construction areas, then check-in is through the UNBC BMAP manager. If you're working on one of the work sites, then check-in will be through the site contractor, but the research manager should also be aware at all times of your location. A requirement of the agreement is a daily safety meeting. There's a form for this on the website that I'll describe later, and also Appendix 3 rather, in the BMAP, in the HSEP manual. Not only do these meetings have to take place and be documented, they require supervisor signatures, talk about what was discussed, talk about any safety issues that came up. We need to be able to produce a record of all of these should we undertake a safety audit or be asked to undertake one. Therefore, not only should these be filled out, as soon as they're filled out or within a reasonable time period, electronic versions of them should be scanned and sent to the research manager. It's important to also remember that the field crew information forms must be on file, and that form can't just list everybody who might be on the form or on the project at any time. It's important to know who is on site on a particular day. Communication in the field will use a number of different mediums. Eventually, there will be a full VHF repeater network operated by PTPLP along the entire length of the pipeline, and this should be in place by 2014. We can therefore use that for communication along the pipeline while maintaining use of our UNBC work channels for chatter. We should also be using spots. We may go to a different system if it appears more productive. But right now, there are specific requirements in the HSEP for who is programmed in relative to who will receive a message if you're on the footprint. So it's not enough to just use the spot the way you've been using it. Refer to the HSEP about who else may be needed to be added to your send help and emergency messages. If you're working in remote areas, you should consider using satellite telephones as your backup because the spot really doesn't allow in and out communications. And you shouldn't plan on cell phones as being your primary contact even if you expect good coverage. During the first week of April, we learned that JGC Fluor has changed all plant site and BISH FSR frequencies to a secure digital channel system. This is on a Motorola digital system and completely incompatible with any of the radios that we have right now. Further, when the repeaters come up, which is scheduled to be in August of this year, those will also be on secure frequencies. In addition, PTP may be also changing their channels. So we're in the process of replacing all of our radios. Your existing truck and handheld radios will still work on the right-of-way, but existing radios will not work at this time along the with anything to do with the plant site. We are, of course, working hard to remedy this situation, but until we have permission for the channels and the radios in place, we'll have to function without updated radios. An emergency procedure needs to be in place for each context. So this isn't necessarily every site, but if you have a series of sites that are all accessed by truck, then your emergency procedure would deal with what evacuation and how you would call people if you had primary access to truck egress. If it's by helicopter, then what's your backup mechanism? We'll go over more about where those can be found later, but one needs to be in place for what you're doing. If you're working on the footprint, there will be active medics online monitoring the radios, and you'll be monitoring the radios at all times. If at any time there is a medical emergency, you can contact the medic on the radio by simply 3 times saying medic, medic, medic. If that message is broadcast or if you hear it over the radio, what that means is all work on the site shuts down completely until all clear is given by the medic. So that includes all construction activity, and it will also include our activities. At the end of the day, your check-out or check-in, if you will, is both through the UNBC Research Manager and PTP. Again, depending on where you're working, details are in the HSEP. The important part is, even if PTPLP or KMLNG or KBR wants to know where you are, that's not going to substitute for the research manager knowing where you are at all times. One of the requirements that will be new to most of us is that personal protective equipment, or PPE, must be worn at all times within the construction footprint. So on the KBR sites, KMLNG sites, and along the pipeline. This consists at a minimum of a hard hat, eye protection, foot protection, high visibility apparel, and hand protection. And if you're working in a high noise area, hearing protection. All of this equipment will be provided to you by the project. We've already purchased it. And it has to, except for the footwear, which you've been encouraged to get, and it has to meet the Canadian Safety Association standards as outlined in the HSEP. Hard hats are required except when you're in the highway vehicle, your truck, or in a field office or lunchroom, or during breaks when not in the presence of other workers. So if you're taking a break and there's still other people working around you, that doesn't constitute an opportunity to take your hard hat off. Eye protection is also required at all times except when you're in an enclosed vehicle, and if you're wearing prescription safety glasses, not regular glasses, with side shields. The minute you stop the vehicle and get out onto the work site, then both the hard hat and the eye protection must be put on. There's one additional requirement with hard hats that I was just made aware of, and that applies when you're working in an active forestry area. So in addition to having a hard hat, in those active logging areas, color matters. And that color must both be high visibility and contrasting. High visibility colors are either fluorescent orange or fluorescent yellow-green, but the contrast depends on season. So you would wear a fluorescent orange hat in summer and a fluorescent green-yellow hat in fall to maximize contrast with vegetation. A number of these hats will be available if your work requires them. Additional PPE may be required depending on what you're doing. We've purchased a number of inflatable life vests which are suitable for work with electrofishing and for the stream work. If you're working in boats or over water, the inflatable vest just has too many risks associated with it, so a fully inflated, a regular PFD is required, as may be other safety equipment appropriate to the device that you're using. One of the requirements of PTPLP is that UNBC will provide PPE training to all participants. That can be arranged by contacting Tricia Chernowski in the Risk and Safety Office. And in most cases, that just constitutes suitable sizing of hats and things like that. But that needs to be arranged through Teresa. If at any time on the work site or going to the work site, encountering a roadblock, whatever it is, if at any time you feel that you're either that you're about to be put into a confrontational situation, or in any way you feel threatened, you should just leave that situation immediately, even if it means abandoning your work plan for the day. So the safety of the workers is paramount. So whether you got into a discussion with a worker or whatever it was, if you feel a situation is unsafe, you should just get out of it, just as you would with any other more physical safety hazard. Any such situations should be immediately reported both to the research manager at UNBC and to PTP or KMLNG as appropriate to that site. First aid training is required of all people, and which is level 1, and first aid kits will be provided in each truck. We have all agreed that off the footprint group size will never exceed 5. If we have 6 people in a group, then medic support and all kinds of other things are in place. After consulting with all the principal investigators, we simply decided that we'll never need more than 5 people working on a team. And 2 teams of 4, 100 meters apart, don't constitute 2 teams. That's a single group, so we will plan to keep group size at 5 or less. When you're on the footprint, either of the pipeline or the construction site for the plant, full medical services are in place. We will have a number of vehicles available for the project or leased until they're in place. And the use of all those vehicles is to be scheduled through the UNBC Research Manager. Each vehicle will have a vehicle log, which you're required to keep up to date with those activities that you use it for the day, as well as to do a pre-trip inspection. You should be familiar with radio calling procedures if you're going on industrial roads, including the frequencies being used and the UNBC work channels. It's important not to be chattering on working on active road frequencies, be those Forest Service roads or the frequencies assigned to you by one of the contractors. In all cases, vehicles must be parked in a manner such that the first move of the vehicle when started is in the forward direction. Obviously, in a pull-through, this happens automatically. But otherwise, any other time, if you're parking, unless reverse or nose-in parking is specifically designated on the industrial site, then you must observe the forward move first parking. That means that you will back into a parking spot, whether you are in the field, away from the field, and also when parking the NRESI vehicles in the compound on campus. Unless your vehicle is equipped with a backup beeper, which of course must be disconnected in city limits, then you should sound 2 short honks on the horn before beginning a backup. In addition, we've been reminded that the maximum speed on all Forest Service roads associated with the project is 50 kilometers an hour, and that there will be no smoking at any time in the BMAP vehicles. Whenever you're involved in work on this project, whether in a UNBC vehicle or your own, cell phones or other portable electronic devices may not be used by the driver when the vehicle is being operated, even if your vehicle is equipped with a hands-free device. This is a project requirement which supersedes the BC legal requirement. If you have to answer the phone, have your passenger do it, or pull over before touching an electronic device. We've been given a list of vehicle requirements that are in the HSEP appendix, but all of the NRESI BMAP vehicles meet these requirements. The only thing we need to pay attention to is the in-vehicle record of vehicle maintenance, which the research manager will keep up to date. There have been a number of additions to equipment that must be present in the vehicle. Please be sure to check the truck contents against the appendix in the HSEP whenever you sign out a vehicle. In terms of some of the other activities, rather than go through them all, I'll just alert you to the fact that if you're using ATVs, there's a section of 17 to review specifically, as well as additional material in the operation of them in Appendix 8. If you're working around water, which in the context of our work is primarily stream work, then pay attention to Section 18 in Appendix 9. If you're working in a boat or over water, whether that's you're operating the watercraft or you're working in a charter boat, then there are a number of additional requirements in Section 21 and Appendix 12. And if you're on a chartered boat, you should also ensure that you are given a full safety briefing before getting underway. And that should include emergency procedures, emergency equipment, those kinds of approaches. If you're using the Archipelago Marine Research Zodiac, then you also need to be familiar with the application for the use. AMR owns the Zodiac. and with their permission, we can be insured on it. We also need to schedule the use of that Zodiac with AMR and be aware of its permitted uses, where, for example, it can be used, where it can't be used, etc. We've developed a full protocol for electrofishing. Any electrofishing requires the VIU or Malaspina course certification. There is a daily checklist that must be completed before the equipment's used, as well as an annual checkup. Again, there's an additional form in the HSEP. And you should refer to sections 19 and to appendix 10. Some of the work may require helicopters. That charting will be arranged through the research manager and PTPLP. All passengers, regardless of how experienced they are with helicopters, must be given a pre-flight safety briefing by the pilot before the flight. And that briefing should include things like loading and unloading procedures, waiting in the helicopter, off-limit areas such as around the rotor, and emergency equipment and procedure, as well as the call sign of the aircraft. Section 24 of the HSEP on helicopter use has been greatly expanded, particularly recognizing that we will be using helicopters to access the mountain areas of the pipeline route. Emergency response plans will have to be detailed, as well as the need for emergency gear to stay with you. The machine will be equipped with emergency response equipment, but if you're being left alone, you need to be prepared to maintain yourself for at least overnight. There's an extensive section in the manual on wildlife encounters. There is no formal bear-aware course that UNBC is offering. So to meet the bear-aware requirements, you should read through section 25 of the HSEP, even though that covers moose, cougar, and bear, as well as moose, cougar, and wolves, as well as bears. Download the BC Forest Service Bear-Aware Training Manual. The link is in this presentation and also on the website that I'll describe later. Watch the video and then complete the post-test in the downloaded course package. Once you've completed that test, sign, date it, and email a copy of it to bmap@unbc.ca, and that will meet the wildlife certification. There's a number of special considerations that we should keep in mind when working in sites, and this is in addition to all the general principles in Section 8. So all work must be pre-scheduled. You can't just decide you want to go out someday, and if you've scheduled work and it's canceled again, that has to be worked through the channels so that the contractor's not expecting you. And PPE must be worn at all times. For work on all KLNG sites, all work must be pre-scheduled. We have to work out any shared resources such as Zodiacs with Archipelago Marine Research. Appropriate PPE is required at all times, and we need to abide by all the general principles. We're still working on final aspects of access given the transition from KBR to FLUR, but specific areas are being identified where we can access BISH. It's our understanding that anything within the plant site will, all that work will be accompanied by wildlife monitors, and we're still in negotiations as to what the requirements are and what resources will be available to us when working either in Emsley or other channels associated with Kitimat arm of Douglas Channel. Other special considerations are relative to drug and alcohol. We have been exempted from mandatory testing. However, the use of illicit drugs and inappropriate use of alcohol or prescription and non-prescription drugs can seriously impair one's ability to work safely. And KBR, KMLNG, PTP, and its contractors will take appropriate measures to create a risk-free environment for themselves. If any UNBC employee is involved in an accident or causes a problem, then they are of course subject to full investigation as you would if you were in a car accident along the road. If you're working with hazardous materials, then you should have received the appropriate WMIS training. Please refer to Section 31 of the HSEP. Every field situation, as I mentioned before, should have an emergency procedure in place. Now, we've successfully argued that these don't need to be site specific. So if you move from one creek to the next, you don't need a different safety procedure. However, if the situation changes, if you're accessing an area by boat or by helicopter or by road, or the road access is quite different, then a site or a context specific response plan needs to be in place. So everyone should refer to Appendix 18 for the details of what those should contain. And make sure that one is developed for that set of circumstances, and the discussion of that emergency procedure should be part of that morning safety briefing research meeting, which will be documented as described before. Incidents may occur, although we certainly hope they don't. All incidents involving wildlife, so encounters with animals that were aggressive or didn't get out of your way when you would have expected them to, should be reported to the UNBC research manager, as well as appropriately to PTP, LP, KMLNG, or KBR, depending on where you are. Again, the research manager can help take care of that. All injuries or illnesses must be reported to the BMAP research manager, who will in turn inform our risk and safety office at UNBC and pass that along to PTP, KMLNG. Any confrontations with the public should also be reported to the research manager, although we're not expecting any, as well as to the appropriate companies. And it's a legal requirement that all serious injuries must be reported to WorkSafe BC. Any injuries that take place by anyone supported by this research money will be taken as counting against the safety record of the companies that are supporting it. So they're taking our safety and our health records very seriously. If there is an incident, all incidents are to be written up either immediately or as soon as practical, and absolutely within 24 hours using the UNBC incident reporting form. That's now contained at the end of the HSEP, but please ensure that copies of that form accompany you into the field. The form will be available through the research manager, through security, and also on the HSEP form site. In addition, if any incident requires medical attention, then WCB Form 6A, also linked on the site and on the UNBC Health and Safety site, must be completed. To help try to organize all this information, I've put together a website, simply bmap.unbc.ca, which consists of a number of pages. The opening home page simply describes a little bit about the NRASI BMAP that we're involved in. The HSEP page describes what's needed to do this orientation, how one gets a copy of the HSEP plan and how it's carried with you. It will only be available in hard copy. Therefore, it's easy to replace if electronic updates are needed. It describes what's needed for the orientation and gives the links for who to contact. As well as this video will be linked to that site. The forms page contains all of the forms that are needed to be signed or could be used in your work, including confidentiality agreements and form information sheets, crew sheets rather. So all the forms are there. The specific procedures can be downloaded in electronic format from the procedures page. The partners page provides a little context as who's involved in the BMAP, and then provides linkages to Archipelago Marine Research, the Center for Conservation Education and Sustainability of the Smithsonian Institute, as well as to PTPLP and Kitimat LNG. The links page contains specific links to additional information, including things about bear awareness training, additional bear training, helicopter safety, MSDS sheets. The FAQ will evolve, but it's again providing some preliminary answers to what will probably be common questions. And finally, the contacts page gives the primary phone numbers and contact for emergency and non-emergency contacts for UNBC. The KMLNG and PTP and KBR ones are in the manual, and we won't be posting them online. Anyone who is fully employed or fully supported by the project, this is not the principal investigators, need to sign a confidentiality and partial transfer of intellectual property form before beginning work. The principal investigators have already signed a separate agreement. And to certify that you've completed this work and you're aware of all the training, if you go to bmap.unbc.ca/forms/hsep.pdf, please write that down because that link is only visible once you finish this presentation. If you download that PDF and fill it out, it will ask you to certify what you've already completed, what training you may or may not need, and sign it. If you're a PI, that's all you need to do. If you're working for someone on the project, then you should have your immediate supervisor sign it as well. And the completed form should be passed on to bmap@unbc.ca, which will pass it on to the research manager. Thanks very much.